And the experience comes into play at your bar as well. Now, in Sidecar, you famously said you don't have a DJ, you don't have a dance floor, and you don't have any rock and roll bands. And you've kept mixology at the heart of the whole experience. Now,
Yeah.
how does this change the experience for the average patron on a night out in town? And what is the difference in clientele that you see coming into Sidecar as opposed to any other bar?
So a couple of things, when we say it's a bar, it is different from being a nightclub or being a youngsters bar or a weekend bar. Ours is a bar
Right,
where you would probably be happy to visit on a Monday or a Tuesday. It does not. You don't have to wait for the weekend to visit a bar.
right,
Uh, and music plays a very, very important role because it's part of the sensory experience. So it's part of the overall experience that you get at a bar, right? So therefore, good control of music and the kind and the genre of music that you intend to play at your bar is very, very important. You spoke about bar being the hero, the cocktail and the bartender being the hero. In both my bars that I have set up, I never let everything just for the interior designer or the architect to handle. I have a very strong brief. I make them, in our first bar, we actually made the interiors guy listen to a song by Toby Keith. It's called I
right.
Love This Bar. It's country. He's a country musician.
Nice.
And I said, you listen to this song, listen to the lyrics, and then you come back to us. And, the next day when you went to meet him, he says, I know what you guys want. So
Wow.
it is important to have a direction. I think it's all about having the right imagination, being able to get the right brief. The layout is for my bar. The layout is not done by the architect. The layout is done by me. So I tell him what size of the bar, which part of the floor the bar should be, where the kitchen should be placed. And the reason why I do that is if you actually walk in, if anybody walks into my bar, even without me telling a customer this is a bartender's bar, the bar becomes the hero because
Right,
you see this nice long bar right in the center, and from any corner of the bar you can actually see the bartender in action. So you might be drinking a beer, but you get a experience of a cocktail. So when you
right.
know that the bartender is making something interesting, he takes away your attention, and therefore you get that curiosity. And like I said, the music genre is very different. The volume of music is very important. It does not come into
Right.
your way of your conversation. And this is a bar where you do not go there on a Friday night to shake your leg. You go to a bar to just kind of either unwind. You might just go to a bar because you're so bored of your living room, so you just want to sit in a different atmosphere and have a great drink. Sometimes you go to the
Right.
bar because the bartender is your friend. Sometimes you go to the bar because the music that we play is great. Sometimes you go to the bar because your friends want you to come there. So that is what it is all about. It's a cult by itself, right? It is not
Right.
driven just by high energy and the fact that it's weekend and you got to party.
And the sense I'm getting is the kind of bar experience you want to provide is a cocktail in itself, which is a mixture of multiple different elements that just
Absolutely.
wows the patron. And moving on to cocktails, right? You've talked about the whole history of cocktails. How in the 50s, prohibition gave rise to cocktails as a concept. In the 60s and 70s, James Bond popularized the martini and gave rise to the classics. In the 80s, you had a punk cocktails, which are colorful and fruity. In the 2000s, we had a resurgence of the classics. In the 2010s, it was a multi-sensory mixing, and now the 2020s are upon us. So, what do you think uh, cocktails are going to look like for this decade? Is it going to be driven by pop culture or by pent-up emotion from everything we've gone through the last couple of years? Are we going to see a resurgence of the Roaring Twenties?
I think it's going to be a combination of everything because what has happened is it's completely a sensory experience. And today, when we look at cocktails and the kind of experience that you extend through cocktails is very different from what it used to be until 20 years ago. So for the last 100 years, before the second golden age of cocktails that we are into, before we got into this particular millennium, what was happening is cocktails were emerging, but it was emerging at a very slow pace. The last 20 years, not just in India, globally also, it's moved at a really, really fast pace in terms of creativity, in terms of the technique, in terms of the art, and the amount of imagination that has gone into it. So it plays on every sense. Like for example, I think the futuristic cocktail is definitely going to be very strongly played on nostalgia. It's
Okay.
going to be played on definitely played on modern techniques. Like you could have a bar which is purely driven by music. Like in my case, at Sidecar, we just introduced right after the pandemic, just about 2 months ago, we introduced a new cocktail menu.
Okay.
Very unusual for a bar after coming out of a pandemic
Very.
to actually use a cocktail menu. And we did it because we came across a book. This was written and published in the year 2018 when we opened the site. It was the same year. And the book is also called A Desire Called Sidecar,
Ah,
right? And it is about authors and their favorite tipples. And these were all writers of the 1920s and 1930s. And what we did is we identified 10 of these authors and we identified what their favorite tipple was. Most of them loved gin, some of them loved bourbon whiskey, some of them loved rum. And we derived a cocktail, and the whole concept of that cocktail menu was that if these authors were alive in today's date, if they happened to visit Sidecar, and as a bartender, if I knew that this is their favorite drink, this is how I would present the cocktail of the present day to the authors of the 1920s and the 30s. So there is some amount
right.
of nostalgia, this history. It
Okay.
also works really well with the concept of Sidecar, right? So I
Right.
think the futuristic cocktails are going to be based on that. But having said that, that is only a perception, or that's only an assumption that I have at this point in time. But to me, I think the cocktail is more like an open blue sky. So there is
Right.
no boundaries. You could go as crazy as you want to be. The important thing is to make sure that it extends an experience to the customer till the time it has the right balance, till the time it looks great, till the time it makes a customer happy after
Right.
sipping it. I think there's no end in terms of imagination.
So a cocktail is as fluid as any artistical experience, right? It's derived from a concept and it just goes from the mind of the creator. Now,
Absolutely.
and it's funny you should talk about launching a new set of cocktails during the lockdown, because during the lockdown, a lot of people have been experimenting with their own cocktails at home. Can you take us through the concoction process? What are some of the base rules to keep in mind, and what are some of the cardinal sins to avoid when experimenting with cocktails on your own?
So first and the foremost, because cocktails means spirits, cocktail means alcohol. So therefore, I would not say have an in-depth knowledge, but have a basic knowledge about each of the alcohol that you're going to be using. So at least you have to have a fair idea in terms of what a whiskey would taste like, or a particular type of whiskey would taste like. Even if you are a consumer, it's always good to taste your spirit even before you use it in a cocktail format. Because even if you were not doing a cocktail, and if you came across a bottle that was interesting but you had never experienced or seen that brand before, it is good to just have a sip of that spirit on its own and see what you can get, or pick up in terms of its flavor.
Right.
What that does is it gives you a fair idea in terms of where inclination of your flavor profile is towards. So it is good to know your alcohol, very important.
Okay.
Second is, if your inclination is towards making cocktails at home, being a little bit more experimental, get the right equipment, and
Right.
see if you can either meet a bartender, do a workshop with him, or if not, follow a few interesting YouTube channels,
Right.
and see how bartenders make cocktails, right?
Yeah.
That itself will give you a fair idea in terms of how it is done, right? Second important thing is to be able to buy the right kind of equipment and glassware.
All right.
Equipment is very, very important, because it will make, it will ease the process of making a drink and help you make it correctly.
Right.
Glassware is very important, because it when you make a drink and you put it in the right glassware, it appeals to the eye.
Right.
So that's very important. Last but not the least, please make sure that you have good quality ice.
Ah, you've mentioned how ice is one of the most important parts of a cocktail. Why is this so?
Because pick up any recipe, go to the internet, pick up any recipe, buy a cocktail book, look at the recipe. You will have all descriptions. You'll have measures of alcohol, non-alcoholic beverages, syrups, cordials, liqueurs. Everything has a measure. They'll say, okay, put this much of this much of that, and then towards the end it'll say shake the drink, blend the drink, stir the drink. It'll give you all instructions, but no cocktail recipe will tell you how many cubes of ice to be used. Now that's where the trick is, because the same cocktail made by a guy who is much more comfortable or has a fair idea of ice will completely elevate the drink, and the same drink with the same recipe made by a very, very amateur person who has no clue about how to use the ice will result in a bad tasting drink. Ice is very, very important. Ice can make a cocktail or break a cocktail,
Oh,
right?
wow.
and
That's
and
powerful.
because ice dilutes, and ice also chills the drink, so it makes the
Right.
drink very, very cold. Colder the drink, better the taste.
Right.
But diluted drink becomes watery, so it completely. So that's the reason why when I say understand the ice and use good quality ice, it means use ice that is nice and hard,
All right.
and that is as clear as possible, not hollow from the inside or does not have too many bubbles. So what happens then is it will chill the drink quickly. It will make it very cold, but it will not dilute. It will not make it watery,
Right.
right? So that is the importance of ice. That's why we never have measures for ice, because I cannot tell anybody use 6 cubes of ice, because I do not know what size in terms of
Right.
the cubes that he or she would have in his bar or at home. So ice will never have a measure, but just look at the ice. So when I get into any bar that is not mine,
Right.
and if I have to fix a drink, I never look at the ingredients. I always go and look at the well and see the ice first. The moment
Right.
I look at the ice, I know exactly, should I shake it long or short? Should I stir it for a long time or short time? So that is my basic understanding. You look at the ice and you figure out, okay, now I will be able to balance the drink.
So ice is the salt to taste for bartending.
Totally,
All
totally.
right. And I also want to talk about the glassware, right? You talked about how important that is.